Attention beatboxers, this is the one video in this guide that you will actually want to show to your arrangers as well. So don't just watch it on your own, send it to them, and I promise it's going to help both of you folks out. So anywho, hello, welcome. I want to talk in this video about how to write beatbox parts into an actual a cappella arrangement. This is a question that a lot of a cappella teams have because it's less common to know how to do this, but I want to emphasize how important it is because you don't necessarily just want to leave everything up to the beatboxer to figure it out, because then, especially if they're a beginner, then it just makes it more stressful, less accessible for other people who want to become a beatboxer, and it'll make things less consistent too. Even if you are a more experienced beatboxer, you can write things in and then help make things, be more controlled and consistent and help with your arrangement. So if you are a beatboxer and your arranger doesn't know how to write a part for you, or if you want to try and write a part for your arranger, then this is the video for you. So if you want to answer the question of how can an arranger write something for me as a beatboxer, then just tell them these 3 things. Or tell yourself the same things if you're the one arranging for yourself. Number 1, write the part as if there was going to be a drummer, and then I'll figure out how to beatbox it. Number 2, don't make it too complicated, since some things are easier on the drums versus by mouth. Now, ideally, the arranger here would have some idea of what's capable with beatboxing before they just give you something super impossible, but if they don't, that's okay. You can always adjust it later, and also scale this to your experience level. Number 3, ask them, can you let me edit the file so that I can add my own lyrics for each sound, or at least let me download a copy? This will be easier because the arranger isn't going to exactly know the notation that I did in this video series to explain each of the sounds. If you are an arranger and you're curious, feel free to go back through some of the earlier videos and learn all the different notations, but it's probably easiest if you just let your beatboxer do that for you. And also, if you are a beatboxer and you learn some new sounds outside of what's taught in this course, then you're going to have to make up your own notation, unfortunately. There isn't really like a super standardized notation for how to do beatboxing, so you'll have to edit it at some point. Okay, so those are the 3 things that you should tell your arranger. And if you're an arranger, those are the 3 things that you should keep in mind. So knowing that, let's hop into Musescore, and then I'll show a bit about how you can use drum notation if you've never done that before. So here I am with Musescore. So this is the program that my a cappella team uses. It's pretty common, open source software for making sheet music. If you use something else, the things that you learn here will probably transfer over. So that's good to keep in mind. And what I've done is I've just opened one of our files, one of our arrangements, and I have gone down to the bottom where I have added a drum kit, which would be the beatboxing part for this arrangement. So I can take this file and I'm just going to show how you can add all the different sounds that we've learned earlier in this course. So I can click a bar. Actually, before I do this, I should show how to add the drum kit. So in order to add the drum kit, you have to go over to the instruments panel, click add, and then add percussion unpitched, and then a 5-piece drum kit. The 5 pieces, I'm pretty sure, are just the kick drum, snare, hi-hat, cymbals, and then toms. So those should be the 5 pieces. Just add it in, and I like to add it in at the very bottom of the arrangement because it's kind of separate from all the other singers. Then I can go into a certain bar and I can click this pencil here in the top left, and then I can go and I can add a note. If I click right now, actually, it's not going to let me add a note because I need to pick what kind of note I want. And this is something that you have to keep in mind with drum kit notation, is that it's a bit different from other instruments because it's not necessarily that a higher note is like the same as a lower note, but just higher. There's a whole drum kit. There's 5 different pieces. So generally, the lower notes are lower, so your bass kicks and stuff, and your higher notes are higher, like your hi-hat, but it's not the same sort of gradient that you would see with, for instance, a piano or a vocal part. So if you go on the bottom, you can see all these different sounds here, and if you click on one of them, then it'll tell you in the corner what that is. So this is telling me, hey, this is a bass drum. So cool, I want a bass drum. I'll click it. I'll add a couple of those. And then I can go over here. This is a snare. So I can add a snare. And then I want a hi-hat. So this is a closed hi-hat. I can add that in. And then I also want to add some toms. So here's a low tom. Here's a high tom. And then there's also something called a floor tom. So that's a really low one. And then what else did we have? Then we had a crash cymbal. And we also had an open hi-hat. So that's a tss, tss. So those are all the sounds primarily that we talked about in this guide. There's some other ones here that you can look into if you're curious. So let me just click this and I'll play it. Cool, so those are all the different sounds. Now, I've actually modified this file so that I can add the sounds easily, but I need to show you what will happen if you just do this to a brand new file. So if I go and I click new and I make a brand new file, there we go. And then I can click percussion unpitched. I'll add that 5-piece drum kit, and that's just going to be the only thing for now. And I can zoom in. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to add a bass kick using the letter B on my keyboard because that's just a keyboard shortcut for doing that. And notice what happens. Oh my goodness. Why is it green? That's weird. I thought all the notes were supposed to be blue. And then look at this. This is green. The rest is green. So is this rest. And then this rest is blue. Oh my God. So basically what happened is that Musescore split it into two separate voices. So there's a lower voice and an upper voice. And the reason that it does this is because drum kits, when you're a drummer, there are certain sounds that you make with your feet. So that would be the kick drum, and you can also do something with the hi-hat with your feet. And there are certain sounds that you make with your arms. So your arm sounds and your feet sounds are separated into these two voices by default. But when you're beatboxing, you only have one voice. So this is kind of a problem. It's harder to use this notation because then if you go, and let's say I go here and I add a snare, now I have a bass kick and a snare at the same time, which I can't really do with my voice, but I can do that on a drum kit. So we kind of have to understand the difference between drums and beatboxing here. There are some sounds that you can do at the same time. So I can do a bass kick and a hi-hat. Again, I'm just using these keyboard shortcuts to add the notes. You can learn those later. But yeah, so you could do a bass kick and a hi-hat at the same time because that would just be pss, pss, pss. We've learned that. But in general, it's harder to do that and less likely. So what I prefer to do is to keep everything as one voice. So I'll show you how I do that. Just delete everything. And then you can go into your drum kit. And then I click the pencil and I click edit drum set. Once I'm there, I can go to the bass drum. This is the only one that's really a problem because everything else is usually on voice number 1. So I go to the bass drum and I click here and I click default voice and I switch that to number 1 instead. And I click apply. And now everything is going to be blue, which is great. So I can add the bass kick. I'm just going to use it. I'm just going to use my keyboard shortcuts instead. So if you edit here, you can see there's different letters here at the bottom. Maybe I can zoom in and show those different letters. So there are all those different letters that you can see, B, A, G, F, C, E, D. Those are all tied to different things. So I'm going to add B, A, C, F, da, 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 da. And now I can add everything. And because it's all on one voice, nothing gets stacked, which is great. It just makes more sense generally for beatboxing. So now this is a and then, oh wait, sorry, this is an open hi-hat. So anyways, you'll have to practice actually reading the drum notation, but boom, just like that. And that's how you can change your Musescore file to just be one voice. If you really want to, you can still add two sounds on top of each other. So I can click a note and then click the edit menu and then I'm going to click the sound that I want to add. So I want to add a closed hi-hat there, and I can click, and now it'll add both of them on top of each other. So I can still do that pss sound if I really want. But in general, it just makes like at least the other 90% of things much easier to edit. Once you have all of this in your Musescore file, then you need to start adding lyrics and text in order to explain what exactly you're doing. Now, normally for a drum kit, you wouldn't have lyrics. It's like, what? Why would you have lyrics for a drummer? But for a beatboxer, it is important, and this is where you can start to use all that notation that I've taught in this guide. So we'll go back, and then I'm going to show some of the beatboxing that I've written for one of the pieces for my team. And you can see everyone else is singing whoo, da, 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 that sort of stuff, but I'm singing, or I'm beatboxing this sort of stuff. Or this is... Quick note here, I actually wrote this notation before I made this beatboxer's guide, so the notation in there is a little bit different. I'd say try to stick to what is mentioned in this guide, and remember you can check the PDF guide in the description if you want to remember what all the notation is. I just kept everything lowercase because for me it works, and honestly you can change it to whatever you like to, but if you're not sure what to do, then you can just stick with the notation that I've provided in this guide. Anyways, back to the video. So these are all the different sounds. I haven't taught you the inward K snare, but that's just something that you might learn on your own time. But you can see how I've added lyrics, so now I know exactly what I'm singing. And it's good to do this because remember that for each part of the drum kit, so for example, for the bass kicks, we have multiple different bass kicks that we can do. For the snares, we have multiple different snares that we can do. So it's not enough to just write bass snare, hi-hat snare, bass snare. You need to actually specify what kind of snare and stuff you're doing, so this is a good way to do that with these lyrics. So not only are lyrics a good way of specifying specific sounds, but you can also specify other things, so like tone. For example, here I wanted to make the K sound a bit darker, so I wrote make the K dark. And the way that you can do that, so to add lyrics, you just click on a note and then you can press Control L. I think you can also add text and then lyrics like there. So I can just press it and press Control L and then I type the lyric in. And then if I want to add text, then I click on a note and I press Control T, and then that will add some text over top of it. So lyrics are for specific sounds and text is usually for general ideas or tones or things like that. You could also specify things that don't actually make sense in the case of a drum kit. So for instance here, I wanted to add a rising synthesizer sound, which sounds something like that. And that doesn't exist on a drum kit, but it exists it exists in my beatboxing kit, so I can add it in. So I just wrote rising synth and then I put some toms there to represent a rising synth. So here. So it's like, so again, using that text, really nice way to just specify some things that are harder to write down specifically in the notation. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can add breath marks. This helps to make things consistent. So for example, in this section, I made sure to add some breath marks after the bass kicks every bar, because that helped me make sure that I was breathing at a consistent time. Otherwise, I found myself, sometimes I was breathing after the bass kick, sometimes after the snare, and then it would mess up the rest of my bar, and I just figured, hey, if I put everything really consistently, that would probably be easier. So depends, you don't have to write breath marks for everything. I haven't written it for most of the sections because sometimes I use certain sounds that help me breathe, pull in air. So if I have an inward K snare or if I have an inward hi-hat, then maybe I don't need a breath mark because those sounds count as the breath. But if I need to add a breath mark, then I can add it in that way. I also wanted to mention that you are free to use other musical notation as well. So you can add things like crescendos and dynamic markers and also accents onto various different notes. At least with Musescore, that's pretty easy to do. But if you added that to a beatbox part, then that would make sense. But just check with your beatboxer in case they don't know how the musical notation works. Okay, so hopefully you have now been able to add some beatboxing into your a cappella arrangement. So if you are an arranger, thank you for doing that. And if you are a beatboxer, then that's great. You're learning so much more about how to beatbox and how to organize and understand how it works. So it'll be amazing, I promise, not only for the current beatboxer to have, but also for anyone else who wants to reuse the arrangement in future years. So great work. Keep it up. Our next video is the last one. And I'm just going to be checking in and seeing if you folks have learned everything that I wanted you to. Hopefully you have. Anyways, I'll see you there.